It is 6 o'clock and it looks like everyone is here. So I'm going to call this meeting to order. This is the regular evening meeting of the Boise City Council on Tuesday, November 9th. We'll open the meeting with an invocation, which we will have a moment of silence and then a pledge of allegiance. Please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you and welcome. Next order of business is the roll call. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Agent.
Here.
Clegg.
Here.
Halliburton.
Here.
Sanchez.
Here.
Thompson.
Here.
Woodings.
Here.
All present.
Thank you. Before we go to the rest of the agenda, I'm going to take a moment of to talk about the new artwork that we have here in the chambers. So we have, for the first time ever, commissioned a work of art specifically for the City Council chambers. This piece of art is called Community. It's by Boise artist April Van de Graft. It uses natural history as a device to communicate contemporary issues about our Boise community. The work depicts three types of birds among a flowering syringa, which of course is the Idaho state flower. It's a western tanager, which is a migratory bird, the house finch, which is a resident bird, and the European starling, which is a bird that was introduced here. These birds coexist among the branches with the bumblebees, apple ermine moths, sawflies, and caterpillars, bringing a balance and beauty to the picture plane that is both active and serene. It's painted in oils and was created as a focal piece for our City Council chambers. So just wanted to take a moment to recognize that. We're really excited to have this new piece of art and hope that you'll join us in enjoying it over the years. Thank you.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
Over here. Council had an opportunity to kind of vote on some of the directions of where we want to head on this one. This was certainly my top pick. Many of you know that I come from a heritage of birders in the family, and my grandpa calls both bluebirds and the western tanager a gateway bird, meaning that they're some of the easiest ones to identify. And once you see and identify those, then it makes you want to see and identify other ones. And so I think it's a great piece of art to have behind us, and I'm excited to have it here.
Thank you for that. Councilmember Sanchez.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just want to thank April Van de Graft for being so open to our suggestions as she created this piece. As President knows, we both love art so very much and want to respect people who have that particular talent, but also so grateful for her flexibility and being open to those suggestions. One element of this piece that I'm particularly grateful for is just the incorporation of migration and immigrants. And something that we're very proud of here in Boise is that we have so many people from different walks of life comprising our citizens. And so I'm so grateful that she highlighted that in her piece.
Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Thompson.
Yeah, thank you. This is really a beautiful piece. I was raised by a mom that was an artist. She was an oil painter, and have a great deal of respect for art and artists and the work that they do. And I encourage you all to at some point come up and take a close look at it, because when you get closer, you'll see quite a bit of detail. There's different insects, and in particular, it has bumblebees, which are one of the coolest things on the planet. And so you'll have to take a look when you get a chance. Thanks.
You bet. Well, thank you. Thanks for putting up with us, celebrating this piece. We're pretty excited about it. Next item on our agenda is the request for approval of the City Council minutes
Madam Mayor,
Yes,
I request approval of the city council minutes from the strategic planning session of October 26, 2021 at 9:30.
Second.
Madam Mayor,
thank you. We could have a all-together motion if you'd like.
Okay. Madam Mayor, I request approval for the city council minutes, strategic planning session and regular day meeting from October 26, 2021. We want to include the November 3rd special meeting, as well as a special meeting from November 3rd.
Second.
Madam Mayor,
Yes,
I just want to note for the record, I'll be abstaining from the October 26th minutes as I was at a conference and could not attend. Thank you.
thank you.
Madam Mayor,
Yes,
similar, I was gone on November 3rd, so I'll be abstaining from that one as well.
all right, noted. Any other discussion? Would the clerk please call the roll?
Sanchez,
Yes.
Thompson,
Yes.
Woodings.
Yes.
Agent.
Yes.
Clegg,
Yes,
Halliburton.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
thank you. Now, special business is item 5, and under special business, we have CDA 2131, a reconsideration request. And we have Cody to present that.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of council. As you'll recall, back in October, you did hear an appeal of the Planning and Zoning Commission's denial of a variance to encroach into the rear and side yard setbacks for a new detached accessory structure with accessory dwelling unit. At the end of that hearing, you did deny the appeal, but suggested if the applicant could have provided additional information regarding perhaps location of underground utilities, and that with that information, a reconsideration might be warranted. The applicant has obtained that information along with more detail on existing landscaping that wasn't presented that evening. So with that, they are asking you to reconsider the application. You don't need to reconsider the request today, merely decide if you'd like to. If you do, we'll notice for the first available public hearing on your upcoming schedule. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor,
Yes, Councilmember Bajan.
I believe I voted in favor of the prevailing motion in the last hearing, and I would now move to grant reconsideration in CBA 2131.
Second.
Madam Mayor,
Moved and seconded.
the basis of the motion is that this is information that we directed the applicant to bring to us because we thought it was material and might affect our decision. And the applicant has now brought that information to us. We've already said it's material and relevant to our decision, and we would consider it. And so I think it's appropriate that we grant the motion.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor,
Yes,
can I just ask a question of Cody from a process standpoint?
sure.
Cody, does it go back to planning and zoning or does it just come directly to us?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Woodings, we would bring it back here.
Great.
All right. Any other discussion? Hearing none, would the clerk please call the roll?
Sanchez,
Yes.
Thompson,
Yes.
Woodings.
Yes.
Agent,
Yes.
Clegg,
Yes,
Halliburton.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
thank you. Next on the agenda is the consent agenda. All items with an asterisk are considered to be routine by the council and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion on these items unless a council member or citizen so requests, in which case the item will be removed from the general order of business and considered in its normal sequence.
Madam Mayor,
Yes,
request approval of the consent agenda as presented.
moved and seconded. I am not going to take anything off the consent agenda, but would like to note that on the agenda is approval for Contractor to do a staffing study on behalf of the city council for our police and fire personnel. We're looking forward to getting the results of that staffing study to help inform, we hope, improvements for both organizations over the next little while. And I would note that's the first time that our staff has actually managed the RFQ process. So thank you, Amanda. With that, would the clerk please call the roll?
Sanchez,
Yes.
Thompson,
Yes.
Woodings.
Yes.
Agent,
Yes.
Clegg,
Yes,
Halliburton.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
thank you. Next order of business is the reading calendar. And I'm getting there, sorry. First reading,
Madam Mayor,
yes,
I ask unanimous consent that all ordinances on first reading be read by number and title only and filed for the second reading calendar.
Without objection.
ORD 47-21, an ordinance CAR 20-00025 for property located at 1909 and 2001 West Boise Avenue, amending zoning classifications of the city of Boise City to change the classification of real property particularly described in section 1 of this ordinance and adjacent rights of way from R-2 medium density residential and C-1D neighborhood commercial with design review to R-ODDA residential office with design review and a development agreement, setting forth a recent statement in support of such zone change and providing an effective date. ORD 48-21, an ordinance amending Boise City Code Title 9, Chapter 9, Boise City Energy Conservation Code to adopt provisions related to duct installation requirements and provide an effective date. ORD 49-21, an ordinance amending Boise City Code Title 9, Chapter 1A, Boise City Building Code to adopt provisions related to mass timber construction and provide an effective date. ORD 50-21, an ordinance amending Boise City Code Title 5, Chapter 12, Boise City Fire Prevention Code to adopt provisions related to mass timber construction and provide an effective date.
Thank you. There are no items on the second reading calendar. That brings us to the third reading calendar.
Madam Mayor,
Yes,
I move that further reading of ordinance 46-21 be dispensed with and the record reflect it has been read the third time in full.
I have a second.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Sanchez,
Yes.
Thompson,
Yes.
Woodings,
Yes.
Bajent,
Yes.
Clegg,
Yes.
Halliburton.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
Madam Mayor.
ORD. Oops.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
It's okay.
ORD 46-21, an ordinance CAR 21-00017 for property located at 911 North Shamrock Street, amending zoning classifications of the city of Boise City to change the classification of real property particularly described in section 1 of this ordinance and adjacent rights of way from R-1A single family residential 2.1 units per acre to R-1C single family residential 8 units per acre, setting forth a recent statement in support of such zone change and providing an effective date.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I move approval of ordinance 46-21.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Sanchez,
Yes.
Thompson,
Yes.
Woodings,
Yes.
Bajent,
Yes.
Clegg,
Yes.
Halliburton.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
All right. Well, there is no unfinished business tonight, and that brings us then to item 9, which is new business and public hearings. First item that we have on the agenda tonight is ZOA 21-3, City of Boise, bringing an amendment to the development code regarding specific procedures to include new language addressing unpermitted work in historic districts. And tonight we have Josh with us to present. Welcome, Josh.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of council. Josh Wilson with Planning and Development Services here tonight to discuss a code amendment addressing historic preservation that we have proposed. So to give some background on the issue, unfortunately, we've seen an increase in unpermitted activities in the historic districts, including demolitions, removal of several large trees that have certainly caught the attention of the neighborhood associations and residents and brought a great deal of concern. The shared concern among these groups is that we really don't have a strong deterrent to these actions in the zoning ordinance. So with the new code provision, we would incorporate a delay of up to 180 days if illegal work is performed, during which all work on the property would cease. During this time, planning staff will prepare a premature alterations report. It'll identify the violations and include recommended rehabilitative measures that could be taken. The report will then be scheduled for a hearing before the Historic Preservation Commission, and they can approve, deny, or approve with conditions that report and require appropriate mitigation of the actions that have been taken. It's important to note that the planning director will have the ability to waive the premature alterations report on issues that are extremely minor. Things that are easily remedied, like some wrong sighting or a single small tree that was removed that could easily be replaced. The intent of this is to prevent the Historic Preservation Commission from being overloaded with these minor, easily fixable issues. At their hearing on September 27th, the Historic Preservation Commission did recommend approval of the code amendment. The biggest issue of discussion was the provision for the waiver by the planning director. I think there was some concern that was at his discretion and could be abused. We assured them that that is not the case, that we do see minor items that could be addressed through that waiver appropriately. But we did agree to bring back a report of the monthly waivers that were granted. We would expect that it would be a very small number, and we would present those to them at their work session so that they were kept apprised of those waivers that were granted. With that, we are recommending approval of the ordinance amendment, and thank you for your time, and I would stand for any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Josh? Well, hearing none, this item applies to all neighborhood associations. We had none sign up. I don't believe we have any online. We don't have anyone signed up in person.
Madam Mayor, I do have someone that just raised their hand.
What's that?
I do just have someone that raised their hand.
Okay, I was just going to ask. We have no one signed up in person, so we will go to the person who's raised their hand online.
That would be Brittany.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, council members. I trust that if you cannot hear me, you'll let me know. Brittany Sigliano.
Brittany, could you speak up just a little? I'm having a little trouble hearing you.
Yes, I will. Brittany Sigliano, 403 North Mobley Drive, Boise, Idaho, speaking on behalf of myself this evening. Madam Mayor, council members, this is a great example of the community and the city working towards a very common goal that for far too long we have been responding to reactively. I appreciate the work that staff and many of my fellow community members have done to reach this point, and I believe that it should be a crucial rung in the city's climate action plan to ensure that we're not misusing valuable resources nor adding materials to the landfill unnecessarily. Additionally, our most affordable housing comes from what we currently have, not what replaces it. Cody, Josh, Ted, and many other staff have worked very hard on this potential amendment. Historic Preservation has supported it, and I would encourage unanimous support as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Brittany. Any questions for Brittany? Is there anyone else who's raised their hand?
No, Madam Mayor.
Okay. Seeing no one else, is there anyone in the audience who'd wish to testify on this? With that, unless there are questions for staff, I'll close the public hearing. Public hearing is closed. What's the pleasure of council?
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I move approval of zoning ordinance amendment 21-3, City of Boise, amendment to the development code regarding specific procedures, section 11-3-4, to include new language addressing unpermitted work in the historic districts.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any comments or discussion?
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
Yeah, I just want to commend the work, as Brittany said, of many community members and our staff in addressing this. This issue came to my attention when I was the president of the North End Neighborhood Association. And there was a house that was largely demolished against what it said in their building permits because there was a windstorm that blew down the last existing wall of this home. And it felt at the time very frustrating as a neighborhood association because there was no real remedy to that violation. And so this, I think, instead of saying, pay us more money, says, here's a significant inconvenience for you not complying with our historic preservation ordinance. And we have our historic preservation ordinance for a reason. It keeps a lot of really beautiful old neighborhoods whole. It helps us accomplish some of our goals, as Brittany said, about climate change and preservation and all of the benefits that go with that. So I'm very excited that staff was able to bring this to us, although I know that it was probably under great stress to you all. And thank you so much. I think that this is going to help us all accomplish a lot more of what we want from our city.
Madam Mayor. Madam Mayor,
Yes.
you may recall, the public may recall this issue coming to a head with the removal of some trees and some other issues on 19th Street in the north end. And you may recall that at the end of that meeting, there was direction from the council to two of us to go pursue and follow up this issue. So first, I want to say for the record, we've discharged that duty. I'm now not under your direction anymore. Second, the structure and the purpose here, the concern that came up in that hearing was that a fine, say $1,000 fine for a violation, could create an opportunity for people to essentially buy their way out of compliance with our city procedures for renovations or work in the historic districts. And oftentimes for the size of these types of projects or for just the value of that real estate, $1,000 fine may be a very trivial expense. And so a rational actor could make a decision to essentially break the law, pay the fine, and cause some lasting harm to our historic district. And so the structure of this ordinance is rather than imposing a uniform fine for everybody that obviously affects different people differently based on their means, it imposes essentially a stop work order, which slows and delays the development, can cause all kinds of problems, and is really cumbersome for everybody in an equal way. That idea came from a lot of work by a lot of people, and I'm really proud of how cleanly and how clearly it's spelled out in this ordinance. So I'll certainly be supporting it.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I'll also add a few points. These were always very challenging when they came before us and the commission. Likewise, because you're in such a rock and a hard place where the individual may or may not have done it on purpose, and sometimes it was very difficult to tell. And at the same time, as Councilmember Bajent noted, these investments are sometimes very very large that they've made into their home. And so I like this solution a lot. I appreciate the work that you all put into it, and thank you for your time and effort. I think it's going to be a great new approach, as you were highlighting, a council member, and I'll be supporting the measure. Thank you.
Thank
Madam
you.
Mayor,
Yes,
thank you. Thank you. Yes, I just want to echo my colleagues. Thank you so much for putting all this work into this. I can't help but refer back to our just recent presentation from Brandy Burns. I mean, when we all oohed and awed over those old structures and to learn that some of them are still being used today. I know that we have folks making big investments, but it's also fair notice that you are entering into a space that is protected for good reason. And I know that a lot of what we appreciate in certain of our neighborhoods is that old architecture, those old structures that really speak to our history. And so I really appreciate staff putting the effort into creating this tool that will help all of us protect these structures moving forward.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to make just a quick comment myself. I was one of the council members asking that this be brought forward, and the staff, I think, has done very good work. I'd also like to thank the neighborhoods and the various interested parties in historic preservation for their willingness to engage in this and help figure out a response that both is measured, it offers the opportunity for the administrative waiver, but also offers the opportunity to really make a difference in how these are treated by ensuring that if there is a penalty, that penalty is meaningful to the person who's committed the act of moving forward without permission. So really excited to see how this works. I'm glad that the Historic Preservation Commission asked for these monthly reports. That's always a good idea in these new ordinances so that we can get some measurement of whether it's working or not, and we'll also be supporting. With that, would the clerk please call the roll?
Sanchez,
Yes.
Thompson,
Yes.
Woodings,
Yes.
Bajent,
Yes.
Clegg,
Yes,
Halliburton.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
thank you. Second public hearing is CAR 28, the Turtling Company, 3823 North Garden Center Way, a development agreement modification to remove use limitation on buildings A and E in a C1D DA zone. Today we have David here to present to us. Welcome.
Thank you. Madam Mayor, members of the council. The applicant is requesting to modify the development agreement associated with the 36th Street Garden Center. The development agreement was included with the original approval in order to restrict commercial uses and enhance the project's compatibility with the surrounding residential neighborhood. The mixed-use project included restaurants, specialty retail, office, townhomes, and live-work units. Since the project's original approval, the development agreement has been modified several times to provide more flexibility in the type of uses allowed on site. And as you can see here from the slide, the subject property is located adjacent to the residential neighborhoods, and it's within a C1D DA zone. This is the site plan of the site. The project is mostly built out and completed with the exception of building E right there, as seen on the site plan. The proposed development agreement modifications are listed here and are included the following points, and I'll just quickly summarize. This is the highlighted and struck out version. Essentially, they're removing the use restrictions from building A, which is a large garden center building, and the future building E to apply the standard use table of the C1 zone to these buildings. It will also allow for a medical office in building D. The general intent of the DA modification is to allow for a larger restaurant use. In this case, it'd be the Sockeye Brewery to occupy the main garden center building. Please note that the proposed development agreement modification only addresses the allowed use of the site and does not change the site plan or any of the building designs. The planning team did receive public comment on the proposed development agreement modification, expressing concerns of on-site parking with regard to the larger proposed restaurant. As such, I will note the following, that there is a shared parking agreement for this mixed-use development, and that the primary business hours for the brew pub would be in the afternoons and weekends when the adjacent offices are closed. This type of shared parking arrangement is encouraged and anticipated in mixed-use developments. Also, there is a public transit bus route and a bus stop adjacent to the site. And finally, the 36th Street Garden Center was intended to provide an amenity for the surrounding residential neighborhoods where people could walk and bike to the site. In addition, the proposed modifications comply with all the required findings as per code. And as such, the planning team recommends approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Hearing none, we'll go to the applicant, David McKinnon, I believe is here. Yes, welcome. And
Madam Mayor, members of the council, Dave McKinnon, 10595 Halter
could
Way.
you tip that up just a hair?
Sorry, I'm a little shorter than I think I am. I'm a big believer in brevity. Dave's covered everything well enough. If you have any questions for me, I stand open for questions. We've been working on this. We're excited to have something back in this beautiful building. So do you have any questions for me at this time?
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
Sir, when can we expect the Sockeye Brewing to be open? That's what I want to know.
It's a great question. As soon as I have plans, they'll be submitted to the city of Boise. And if the city of Boise can make those plans go through any faster, and with your support, we'll get it done as quick as possible.
Noted. Thank you.
Thank you. David, I do have a question. So if we remove the restrictions on building E, which is yet to be built, it widens the scope quite a bit for what could be in there. I just wonder if you could give us some assurance that that use would not overwhelm the existing parking and the other. I mean, it would be in your best interest not to do that, but would love to hear you respond to that.
Absolutely. Building E was originally supposed to be part of the garden center, and they wanted a larger bulk retail for it. Once we opened the garden center, we realized we have more than enough space inside this building for our garden center, and we had a hard time actually filling it with as much retail use as we projected. And we said, we don't need to spend another $800,000 on an additional 3,000 square feet of retail that we have no need for. So we said, let's not worry about that. What we did instead is put up a shade structure. We took the old 36th Street plant building that was there. We cut all the rotting parts off, put some concrete columns up, and there's a shade structure that sits there right now. The intent was to have something there because it would look awkward just to have this open space. And so we put that there. It was great. We had events there. We've had weddings there. We've had ladybug festivals, which is kind of a weird thing. But the idea behind building E at this point is we have the live work buildings that are right there. And the idea would be to put another live work attached there. There's 0 lot line buildings right there. We built that with the intent that in the future we could do that. And so there's a 4-hour firewall right there, 0 lot line. So we'd put another townhome there. And we're in the process of working through that right now for design.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure we got that on the record, that although the use restrictions will be gone, there's still plenty of other restrictions in the DA.
Yep.
Any other questions? All right. I
Thank you,
think you're
Mayor.
off the hook. Next, we have the Collister Neighborhood Association is the neighborhood of record, but we didn't expect anyone. Do we have anyone online?
I don't believe so. Not for the association.
Okay. And we have one person signed up in person, Monty Ward. Go ahead, you're up.
Yeah, I have a couple of properties across away from there, from this project. I'm all in favor of this.
Before you start, I need to state that I didn't state that we were opening the public hearing when David came up and spoke. And so the public hearing is now open. You're the next speaker. Thank you.
Sorry. First time. I'm all in favor of this project, and I have a couple of properties on the other side of Hill Road there. My only concern is straight across from building C and D on between 36th and Hill Road there is a public parking there. And I just don't want to see that. I mean, it's first come, first serve. It's used for mountain bikers and skiers and commuters and all the parents and stuff that come from the school to pick up their kids that come across the street there. And so I just hate to see that all of a sudden become an employee parking or something of that sort. That's my only big concern is that happening? Because I know there's going to be a little bit of some parking issues there, and parking on Woody Lane, and the people are going to be complaining a little bit about that. So I just, that parking lot sitting there, and it does get used, and I know it's first come, first serve. That's my only concern, is that thing becoming a employee parking lot to, for the brewery. And just want to state that it's been, they tried to use it once before, and they posted signs up, and the city pulled them down after we put it to notice. But they tried to take that parking lot as a only for that garden center there at one time. So I just want to make sure that doesn't happen again, and it stays a public use.
Thank you.
Yep.
For the record, please state your name
Monty Ward.
and your address if you'd like.
I have 3520 Hill Road, which the duplex is across the street there.
Okay.
And then I also own the lot that's down and around the corner there, but
Thank you.
thank you very
questions?
much. Thanks.
Okay, hearing none. I don't have anyone else signed up in person. And do we have anyone raise their hand?
Yes, Madam Mayor, we have Debbie McGee.
Okay, we'll go to Debbie.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Debbie, welcome.
Yes, hi, Madam Mayor and council members. My name is Debbie McGee. I live at 3819 North Woody Lane. I am representing myself and the homeowners that are in this area. There are 11 individually owned homes, and we are not opposed to the changes, but we also have concerns over parking, some of us more than others. My purpose here is to just make mention of this, and I want to thank Dave McKinnon, who has worked with me over the last couple of days. I was newly appointed as a sub-representative to this homeowners association, so I appreciate that. But for the record, I just want to state that there is wording that says removing the restrictions will not adversely impact the parking situation. And we certainly are all excited to see Sockeye come and very hopeful that that is true. But I would like to point out that the bistro had a seating limit of 60, I believe. And the garden center, I don't know what the exact limit was, but I would say at best it usually had 10 to 20 people, except maybe at holiday times when it might have been a little bit more. And what I am asking for is that if parking becomes an issue, that we are just noting now that we do have concerns and we would like the possibility to readdress that at some point in the future. We might need a few reserved places for residents. Sockeye has not completed their proposal, as I understand, but they were kind enough to meet with us. And the number that they tossed around was to have seating for 200. So I do think that is a big jump. And that is just for that space, not including what other retail spaces would be. So just to summarize again, we are very much in support of the recommendations here. We're looking forward to Sockeye, but we just want to make note of our current concerns and hope that we would be able to address potentially having a few designated residential spaces. And again, thank Dave McKinnon for his help and reassurances. I think that this could happen if needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. Any questions?
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Debbie, for coming out and sharing with us. When you say designated residential spaces, are you talking about on-street parking or off-street parking that's shared with the development?
I am speaking about the shared parking lot spaces. Okay. It is true that we all have 2-car garages, but we do have Friends Visit, and there's really not any designated spaces for that. And Dave, perhaps you can help me with this. Woody Lane, I think it's currently called Woody Drive, but I think it's supposed to be Woody Lane. I don't think there's actually supposed to be any parking on that, which I will admit, even I'm guilty of occasionally parking there. So we don't, as homeowners, have any designated saved spaces at this time to, for instance, have guests or a child visit or something like that. We have not needed them in the past, and we are very hopeful that we won't need them. And I don't think we'll know until we see things, see how things are going to pan out.
Great. I appreciate you sharing that. I'm looking at the Google satellite view, and it does look like there's on-street parking, which is why I asked that question. I wasn't.
When you say on-street, I'll turn that over to you, Dave, if you can help me out here.
Thank you. Any other questions? Well, thank you, Debbie. Seeing no other questions, or are there any other hands raised?
No, Madam Mayor. No.
Okay. We don't have anyone else signed up. Is there anyone else here in the audience who would wish to testify on this item? Okay. With that, are there any questions? Oh, the applicant gets a rebuttal. Sorry. Go ahead, David.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Again, Dave McKinnon. Just to address a few things with parking that were brought up, there is on-street parking on Woody Lane. The parking lot across the street from 36th Street, it's got a long and funny history tied to the Peanut Roundabout. That was originally supposed to be nothing but just a depression area, just like the one kitty corner from it. And I actually went to ACHD and said, this is stupid. We're going to have a weed patch and a weed patch surrounded by this really nice roundabout. Can we do something else? And so I actually was the one that asked for that. We did have a license agreement for that when we did that with ACHD. The turtling company paid for the landscaping around it, and we paid for the water to be stretched underneath the street to go over there. And so we were part of that when it went in. It's owned by the public, and we have no problem leaving that to the public. What other question was there? Questions? Do you have any questions for me? Any additional questions?
I have one quick one. My memory when we first approved this development was that buildings CD, the big one and the two along 36.
Yep.
Yeah, they're B, C, and D are mostly daytime uses, and that the parking that would be used for those is open in the evening, which would be the primary use time, evening and weekends for, especially now, the use that's being slated for the biggest building. Is that still the case?
That's still the case. Building D is Sun Valley Skincare. They close before 5. Building C is Horizon Dental, which closes before 5 and is only open multiple days a week, but not consecutive days during the week. Building B is also closed by 5 o'clock. There's one tenant that's typically there longer, but it's a single physical therapist on the second floor that typically is there.
And remind me, do you have, I know we don't have an active bike share system, but when we did, was there a bike share station here?
There's not a bike share station there, but there are 2 bike racks that were installed.
That's what I thought. Okay. And are there currently scooters that end up here?
There have been scooters that had ended up there. I'm not a huge fan of the scooters that end up there because they typically end up laying down over there, but they are often picked up and dropped off there.
Seems like a prime spot for those to start migrating to. All
See
right.
that?
Thank you. Any other questions?
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
you might be able to answer this, or staff might be able to chime in as well. Just a little bit more about that funky parking lot over there on the corner.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm trying to understand what the intended use of that parking lot was. You all helped develop that parking lot and put it in place. Was the intended use when it was approved by ACHD and I guess the city of Boise to be just general parking for anyone in the public to use any way that they want? Was it?
Yes.
Okay.
Councilman Halbert, let me back up a little bit on that. When we built this site, there was no peanut. In fact, it was supposed to be just a regular roundabout. And then it changed to the peanut shape, which is really kind of a unique feature for this whole neighborhood to have that there. And I just hate the look of the depressed weed patches. And we have one that's directly across the street from our office. Didn't want to have it I guess bookshelved on or bookended by that. She said, let's do something else. Can we try something else? We also recognize the fact that we were having buses from the school district park in the back of our parking lot to load people. We still constantly have people that bring their bikes to our parking lot and park. Multiple people park in the parking lot to go use Hill Road and to exercise up off 36th Street. So we said, if we have something that's over there, we'll help you do it. And so that's the reason why we stepped out to do that. We saw there was a need.
And Madam Mayor, just follow up there. It does seem sort of funky to have this public surface parking lot for nothing real, for anything, I guess. The concern that was brought up by a citizen was that it would be completely full of employee parking. And you had also mentioned that you would make sure that this was still available to the public. And I guess I'm trying to reconcile in my mind exactly what that means. Does that mean that like there would be ways where we would discourage employee parking there, or because it's public and it's not really owned or used by anyone, that it really would just be available for anyone who wanted to use it, whether it was an employee or anyone else? Were you responding to his concern, or were you saying that we would just kind of let it do what it does?
We have no control over that parking space. And if I wanted to park there if I wanted to park.
Can you speak up just a little?
Sure. It's a public parking space and it's maintained by ACHD. It's owned by ACHD. It's in ACHD's right of way. That's all I can offer at this time.
And Madam Mayor, just one more follow-up here on this question. Again, this might be something for staff to chime in on. If there was a solution that was put forward as far as making it 2-hour parking or a certain time limit for parking, is that something that we have the ability to do? Is that something that would serve the purpose of the neighborhood? Is that something that's out of our jurisdiction? Like, are there potential ways to address the neighbor's concern?
Madam Mayor, members of the council, to restrict the act or use of that parking lot, you would have to work with the highway district. It's in their right of way, so they have control of it.
Perfect. Thank you.
Madam Mayor,
Thank you. Yes,
just a
Councilmember
point
Baker.
of clarification on that. I think that's not as settled as we all think it is. And if we get to that point, it's worth another conversation here. There's some disagreement among the agencies, but then again, maybe not. And it's something that's coming up in another part of our city right now. So in the event that that gets explored, there may be some tools that the city of Boise has that we have not historically used in the past. And we can follow up about that later if we have to.
And just for clarification, we've never counted that as any of our off-street parking for our project.
Any other questions? All
Thank
right,
you.
thank you, David. Any questions for David Mosier before we close the public hearing? Okay, hearing none. The hearing is closed. What's the pleasure of council?
Madam Mayor,
Yes,
I move approval of CAR 21-28, the Turling Company Incorporated at 3823 North Garden Center Way. Development agreement modification to remove use limitation on building A and E in a C-1D-DA, C-1D/DA zone.
Second.
moved and seconded. Discussion. I will have just a moment of discussion. I was on the council when this was originally approved. The issues haven't changed since then. There was concern about parking when it was first approved. There's concern about parking now. And yet over the years, it has been, I think, a real addition to the neighborhood. I believe most people agree with that. The addition of the little parking lot on the ACHD right-of-way actually just provides more parking. It is on a public agency piece of land. So I think any fears that it would be taken over for the private use are overblown. And with all of that, I am very much in favor of moving this forward so that this center can see if it can reestablish its vibrancy.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
I do think that this is a great use of the space. And I guess one comment that I would have is that from running a business next to a brewery and also frequenting breweries, there's a lot of people who ride their bikes to breweries. And so hopefully that diverts some of that traffic. And then hopefully that also encourages you to have ample bike parking in that area. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other? Well, Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Sanchez,
Yes.
Thompson,
Yes.
Woodings,
Yes.
Bajent,
Yes.
Clegg,
Yes.
Halliburton.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
All right. Next item on our agenda is item 3. Sorry, I have to turn my page here. PUD 19-11 and CFH 19-13. Jamie and Joe Scott, appeal of the Planning and Zoning Commission's approval of the time extension associated with a conditional use height exception, river system permit for residential plan development. David Mosier, you are back up. Welcome again.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. I'll try to keep the presentation short. The application before City Council tonight is an appeal of a time extension associated with a mixed-use development containing 304 dwelling units comprised of 5 buildings with a height exception. The 7.4 acre property is located at 3600 West Americana Terrace in a C3D zone. The reasons for the appeal can be generally summarized into these 3 points. The applicant has presented no grounds for the extension request. The Planning and Zoning Commission's decision not to hold a public hearing was in violation of city code and state statute. And the application's request of the 2-year time extension was submitted after the project expired. To address these concerns, I'll note the following points. First, in order for a time extension request to be heard, one of the 3 following findings here must have been met. And as discussed within the project report, none of these conditions have been met. Also, I would note that the time extension is a request to grant additional time to an already approved planning application, in this case, PUD 1911 and the associated CFH. As such, a public hearing is not required, and according to the development code, no additional justification is required by an applicant to request a time extension. Finally, the time extension request was submitted prior to the planning and development and the river system application expiring. This slide shows the project's timeline. As you can see, the city council adopted the new reason statement and findings based on the decision of the appeal back on October 1st of 2019. Or it could be argued that the final approval date of the application was as late as 2020, following the conclusion of the judicial review. Either way, the time extension request was submitted on July 16th of this year, was requested prior to the project expiring. In conclusion, the planning team recommends the appeal be denied. Thank you.
Any questions? All right, this is an appeal. So we'll first hear from the appellant and then, or the appellant's representative, and then the applicant or the applicant's representative. With that, Terry Koppel, you're up.
That's correct. Thank you very much, Madam Mayor, members of the Boise City Council. My name is Terry Koppel of the law firm of Davison and Koppel. My address is 199 North Capitol Boulevard, Suite 600, right across the street. And as stated, I'm appearing here on behalf of Joe and Jamie Scott, who live on Houston Road here in Boise. What we're asking the City Council to do is to reverse the decision of the Planning and Zoning and allow the public to be heard on this application for basically another 2 years to try to comply with the conditions of this PUD or conditional use permit. The reason is because we should have been allowed to have a public hearing where the public could have set forth the reasons why it was that the application for another 2 years should be denied. And then we ask you to reverse it and send it back to Planning and Zoning with instructions to allow a public hearing on that application.
Madam Mayor.
Now, we've asserted 5 different reasons.
Madam Mayor, one question.
Oh,
So
I'm
as you go through these, sir, it'd be very helpful if you could identify which statute you say allows it. So you say you should have had a public hearing, just as you're ticking through.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I want to on the record anyway. So the first ground is under Boise City Code 1103.10B. That is the provision that talks about when a public hearing must occur on a renewal of a permit. And one of the grounds is that a hazardous situation is present after the granting of the application, a hazardous situation. We contend that that has occurred. The staff report says it hasn't, but we say it has. And it's because of the fact that there's no fire protection. On May 15th, 2019, before the hearing in front of Planning and Zoning approved of this project, the Boise Assistant Fire Chief wrote to the city and said that this project does not comply with the fire code, and specifically the International Fire Code that is adopted here in Idaho.
Mr. Koppel, could you pull the mic down just a little bit?
Yes, is that better?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. The Assistant Fire Marshal said that this project was only capable of supporting 200 watered units in that project, and they had applied for 304. The fire department said you have to build a secondary emergency egress road from this project because Americana Terrace, of course, is a dead-end road. That recommendation from the fire department was adopted by the Planning and Zoning Commission in condition number 7, that in fact they have to build an emergency road, and the only place it could go is through the Catherine Albertson Park. So they would have to use the park to build a bridge over the Settlers Irrigation Canal to go through the park in order to exit in case there was an emergency, such as a fire or an active shooter or something like that in the project. That was granted, as well as another condition was put in that original permit, was that Settlers Irrigation District had to give their written permission for a bridge to go over the Settlers Irrigation Canal. That canal, which is a large canal, is all located in the park. So when the original application was granted, you had to have a fire exit, and then you had to have the permission of Settlers Irrigation District.
I'm going to ask you to stay to the topic at hand, which is why this extension shouldn't be granted and not try to relitigate the hearing.
Okay, I'm not trying to. I'm just trying to set the stage for the fact that on June 10th, 2021, the Parks Department for the city of Boise refused to allow the developer to build the emergency exit through the Catherine Albertson Park. And that letter is in your packet of materials. That basically says the legal department for the Parks Department says that it cannot go through the park. That means that the emergency fire road that is essential for this permit can't be granted and can't be constructed. That is a hazardous situation. When you look at the purpose of the ordinance, which is to allow the city to review any change of circumstance, a material change in circumstance that creates a hazardous situation, that is exactly what's happened here. In addition, Settlers Irrigation District has, of course, refused to grant their permission for a bridge over the canal as well. So what we were asking for was a hearing in front of Planning and Zoning so that we could address these issues. Because of that, we feel that they violated the section of the Boise City Development Code that I just provided to you. In addition, in terms of specific code sections, the matter was on the consent agenda for planning and zoning. And in the specific code sections with regard to consent agendas, 1103-03.13, it states that if there's opposition to a matter being on the consent agenda and there's an objection, then it cannot be on the consent agenda and it goes to the public hearing. And that's what we did. And then the staff moved the matter from the consent agenda for planning and zoning over to the public hearing. When we went to the public hearing, expecting to be able to talk about the fact that there's no emergency fire egress from this property as required by the permit, and that creates, of course, a hazardous situation for the project, the Planning and Zoning Commission instead took a vote on no public hearing and not allowing the public to testify in front of them. Then after doing that, so that we couldn't speak, then the Planning and Zoning Commission approved the renewal with no discussion of the merits or of the relevancy of any of the factors that could apply to a renewal of a permit. So we feel that that was a violation not only of the 1103-03.13, but also of Idaho Code Section 676534 that says that the zoning code is at a minimum at public hearings is to allow affected parties the ability to be heard at that hearing. Doesn't mean you're going to win, but you are entitled to be heard. And that is, of course, an important right, as we all know from these kinds of hearings. So our second ground was the objection of the fact that we were given with one hand of having the removed from the consent agenda, put on the hearing, but then voting not to have anybody talk about it and then to immediately approve it without any analysis. That we feel was an error.
While you still have some time, I'm gonna, if we'd stop the clock for a minute.
Okay.
I'm gonna ask you a question.
Please.
So you've used most of your time to say that you didn't get a public hearing. You thought you should have. You do have a public hearing tonight. You're the only one here, I believe, to testify. Do you feel that the public hearing tonight remedies what you're objecting to didn't happen?
I don't, because this is an appeal, and this body, the city council, sitting in a quasi judicial capacity that is determining the specific facts with regard to a specific piece of property. You're sitting as an appellate body. And that in fact, we should have our day in front of the Planning and Zoning Commission, because I think that if we were able to show them these facts, the fact that the Parks Department is not going to allow an emergency access, the fact that during the last 2 years, the developer has not done anything on the ground in terms of applying for building permits or anything else, or revising their application, that does not justify an automatic.
So anyway, you're saying no, it doesn't.
It does not.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. The third ground was, and I want to make sure I get all this in the record, the developer didn't begin the development within the 2-year period of time. One of the conditions that's set forth in the letter of approval is that the developer is required within 2 years of the granting of the permit to apply for a building permit and start foundations or footings in the project. They can also start using it for the purposes. If they do that within the 2 years, then they've perfected their permit. And then the idea, of course, is to make developers proceed with the development and just hold on to the rights to either sell or to do nothing with. So in our situation, the developer did none of that during the 2-year period of time. And even though the staff's position, the developer's position, we don't have to give you any reason why we didn't do anything on that project, we disagree, especially when you have a contested issue such as that. We think that the law requires that if you have standards and requirements that have to be met and you ask for an extension, at least you have to justify what those are. That
Madam
was
Mayor,
not done in front of planning and zoning.
again, which part of the law, which statute requires that?
With regard to the 2 years, it's 1103.
No, sorry. Which part of the law requires the applicant to demonstrate a basis or a reason for their delay?
Okay, the Idaho Code Section 67-6535-2 requires a reasoned decision. So, and what's appearing in front of you now as an appellate body, you're supposed to review whether planning and zoning made an error in what they did on this renewal. But you as a body, you don't know what the opposition could have said. You don't have a reasoned decision where planning and zoning, through the help of staff, would prepare a decision that you can review that actually makes sense. So for example, here, if this was appealed to court, a judge would be looking at this and saying, well, I don't see a reasoned decision from P&Z. And of course, we don't know what'll happen with the council, but you have to have a reasoned decision. The courts say, at a minimum, at least tell us what standards you applied them to the facts, and how you rule. It's the only way an appellate body can do it. You're sitting in an appellate body today because it's an appeal. You're not the original deciding body. And so that's why we're asking that you at least refer it back to planning and zoning and say, because the park department will not allow a fire road to this project. And this is a huge project. Remember, this is 304 units. It's 5 buildings, 6 stories, 445 parking spaces. So it's a massive project. So you should at least allow the public to be heard when you have these kind of issues, especially during the 2 years, nothing has happened. So that would be the code section. I'd respond to that. Finally, the whole issue of whether the application was renewed within that 2-year period of time. The letter from the city gave the applicant 2 years to do the project. And the letter from the city specifically says, from the date of the decision of the Planning and Zoning Commission. Now, the actual hearing was June 10th of 2019. The letter from the city is dated June 12th, 2019. So I'm just going to say, for the purposes of arguments, it's June 12th, because that's when the reasoned decision from Planning and Zoning came about. That has never changed. And in fact, after the appeal to court, where the court reversed the decision and sent it back, the city council in December of 2020 reaffirmed the June 12th letter and did not change the fact that it had to be, if they're going to renew, it has to be 2 years from the date of this decision. They didn't talk about the appeal. There was no stay. The applicant didn't ask for any extra time or an amendment to the letter. They, of course, filed their application in July, a month late.
Madam Mayor, time.
Your time's up.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor, I think I might have a question.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, will you remind me of your name?
Terry Koppel.
Terry, thank you. So what I feel like I'm hearing from you is that a new hazard has been presented in that they haven't been able to address the emergency access solution going over Settlers Canal. And I guess my question is, was that discussed and brought up in any of the other hearings, that there was an emergency access issue that had to be resolved? So is this an old hazard, or is this that has already been discussed, or is this a new hazard that had never been discussed until?
This is a new hazard because of the fact that the Parks Department, after looking at the deed to the Albertson Park and realizing that it is so strict that it has to be used as a nature walking park, that it would be forfeited. The city would lose the park. This letter from Doug Holloway, the Director of Parks and Recreation, is in your file. This is dated June 10th, 2021. That's a new fact. The Parks Department has said there's going to be no road through the Catherine Albertson Park, which is consistent with what Settlers Irrigation said. What that means is now we have a project that has no fire exit, it's egress, that does not comply with the fire code. And I would go back to the original May letter of 2019. The Assistant Fire Chief said, if there's any variation whatsoever from what our requirements are here, you have to bring this back to the fire department for approval, because they don't want to have hundreds of people with bad things happening on that street and only have one entrance in, because cars are going to be fleeing, people are going to be running, it's going to be a mess. So this is a new fact, a new factor that at least the planning and zoning should have allowed us to bring this to the attention so they could decide, well, we have a big issue here. What are we going to do about it? Doesn't mean I'm going to win, but it should have been considered, and that's error. And I think, it's my opinion, that on appeal, I believe a court would say, you're right. The code says if there is a hazardous situation that is developed from after the original application, then the application must have a hearing on the renewal of that application.
Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor,
Councilmember Bajent.
couple questions. First, on the hazardous situation, I mean, the hazardous situation is a lot of people in the park and no fire ingress or egress, which is why at the original public hearing and the original application required a letter from the fire department and that access road. So the hazard is the people. The issue is that that access road is a problem. The hazard hasn't changed, right? It's not a new hazard. It's the old hazard of a lot of people around the potential development without fire access. The issue is procedural in that they may not be able to obtain the fire access road they need to mitigate the old hazard. Why isn't that wrong?
Madam Mayor and Councilman, I disagree with your analysis. Fire is always a hazard. It was mitigated by the fact that they had an egress road. They were going to build another road that would go into the park and exit out the park. And they had to do the bridge over Settlers and that sort of thing. So that risk, that problem was mitigated, or as the fire department would say, was dealt with in the way that would have no risk. Since that time, the Parks Department has withdrawn any support whatsoever for that road going through the park. Now, that risk, which was mitigated or didn't exist or was gone, is now present. So fire is always a risk, no matter at all times, but you can mitigate it. And that's what they did in this particular situation. And that's why the Planning and Zoning Commission should have made the decision to allow us to talk to them about it.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
second question I had for you, sir. I think you were probably just about to get to it when you ran out of time, which is that on your third argument, you need to deal with the provision of the statute that says an approval shall become final upon the issuance of a written decision or order. You made that argument after 10 days of elapse, provided, however, that such effective date shall be stayed by the filing of an appeal. You, of course, filed a number of appeals and got the benefit of them here. Why doesn't the other side get the benefit of the tolling in that statute?
Because it doesn't provide for that in the Boise ordinance. The Boise Development Code does not say, and the letter of approval does not say that if somebody appeals something, that the time period for 2 years is extended. I would, with respect's sake, turn the argument around. Show me in the Boise Development Code where there is a stay of the 2-year period of time, especially since the approval letter says it's from the date of this approval letter, June 12th, 2019. And then after it came back on appeal, it came back in front of this council on December 1st of 2020. And this council approved the original 1990 letter without any alterations, saying you had 2 years from June 12th, 2019. So I would say there is no provision in the law that allows that.
Thank
And
you.
also the developer, I'm sorry, the developer, all they had to do was go down and apply for a building permit and do some footings or do something. Remember, nothing is acquired for 2 years. Yes, there was appeal. There was a temporary stay, but that was lifted. These are factors, and I guess we are arguing the merits. But my point is that planning and zoning should have had a public hearing. The public should have been heard. We should have been heard. We didn't have this kind of discussion with planning and zoning. It was, okay, we've got to move it from the consent agenda. We put it on the public hearing. We show up to have a public hearing like this and talk seriously about the issues. And they say, well, we're going to have a vote. Do we want a public hearing? We'll listen to them. And they said, no. So no public hearing. Then they said, are we going to approve the extension? And they said, yes. And they approved it. No analysis, no discussion on a very serious, big project.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
that's my third question, which is I don't think I read the code the same way you do. Removing it from the consent agenda does not immediately place it on the public hearing docket. It just means it needs to be voted on separately. Isn't that?
It doesn't say that. I don't read the provision that way either. It says if there's people opposed to it, then you move it over to the public hearing agenda. I don't know where else it goes if it doesn't.
We vote
go
on
there.
things all the time without a public hearing. It just has to be voted on separately, not on the consent agenda.
But I disagree that that was the intent of that provision of the development code.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other? Thank you.
Thank you.
We will now hear from the applicant or the applicant's representative. It looks like Joanne is coming forward. Joanne, before you start, I just want to let the council know that I asked, you had made an argument in one of your letters that this perhaps was not something that should be appealable to a city council. And I have been told that the development code provides that review body decisions may be appealed to council. It's a very broad statement. So at least in our perspective, just about anything is appealable to us if it's a decision by a lower body.
Okay, and thank you. Joanne Butler, 967 East Park Center Boulevard. And I appreciate your comment. And I heard a number of questions from council members, especially Councilmember Bagnett. So I would like to answer those questions. I asked for a little leeway when I answer them on my time, but I'll try to keep it to 3 minutes. I again gave you my address representing JO Holdings. There was no error by the Planning and Zoning Commission in granting the timely request for a time extension on the permit. Boise City Code 110303.7 says that a decision shall be stayed by the filing of an appeal. That statement is also on the first page of the permit that was granted by the city to our client. So it was a timely request for a time extension. The permit contains a condition of approval allowing for time extensions, and within those time extensions, one can move to perfect their permit. The commission decision was not arbitrary. It is completely within Boise's police power to allow a permit extension on a 2-year basis, not to exceed 6 years, for projects such as Trappers Island that are complex and, for 2 people, contentious. There is nothing arbitrary in the commission's respect for and adherence to the city's code and the permit's conditions. Mr. Koppel's clients actually had the ability to appeal the time extension condition when he appealed the 2019 permit and other conditions, such as the height condition contained in that permit. He did not. He has sat on his rights he might have had to appeal the time extension condition of approval. There was no right to a public hearing before the commission. Boise Code establishes only limited situations where a public hearing is required in connection with a time extension. Staff pointed out that those situations do not exist. Mr. Koppel is creating a hazardous situation where none exist. There is nothing on that property that has changed. The applicant is still working very diligently to perfect that permit. Mr. Koppel's clients would like to style the review of the permit's condition as an application. It is not. Mr. Koppel cites two sections of Boise Code regarding public hearing provisions for hearings and decisions like reasoned decisions that only occur when an application is before the commission. That was not the case here. We are well past the 2019 application stage where Mr. Koppel's clients absolutely did receive process in the hearings. The decision of the city is final. Our client has a vested right to continue to work toward establishment of the use outlined in the permit. That work is continuing. The unbridled speculation by two people opposed to Trappers Island about what will or what will not be able to be accomplished is just that, speculation. We are very much aware of the conditions that we have to meet, and we are working to try to provide them. Time will tell whether Trappers Island's applicant will need to make either a minor or a major or maybe no revision to their application. It is that relatively short time frame, 2 years after a year was sucked up by the district court. It is that relatively short period of time and a 2-year extension that, in all fairness, we argued to the commission should be provided. They did provide it, and rightly so. This was a timely request to address a condition contained within a permit. We respectfully ask the council to uphold the commission's decision that the commission made to grant that time request and let us go forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for Joanne?
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I might just ask the same question that I asked of the appellant. The appellant's saying that there is a new hazard that exists because of Parks and Rec's findings that a road could not connect to the other side as far as emergency egress. And I guess what I feel like I'm hearing from you is that you're saying that that hazard was already presented. It's not a new hazard. Nothing has actually changed, and that you are still working on addressing that situation, but it's not a new hazard that hasn't been discussed, and that there's no actually physical changes to the land in that area or new hazards that haven't been discussed before. Am I understanding that correctly?
That's correct. There is no hazard that exists today. Nobody is in harm's way. The situation exists that everything on the ground remains. We have to address those situations, and we're working hard to do that.
Right. Thank you.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
just to ask that question again, why isn't the appellant wrong? Or why isn't the appellant right? I'm sorry, that a hazardous situation has developed or has been discovered in the area because fire access won't be able to take place through the park as everybody had envisioned at the time of the hearing.
That is his speculation purely. The applicant has the vested right to continue to work with Boise City's departments and adjacent agencies such as Settlers Canal to try to work out those conditions of approval. So it's speculative as to whether or not that letter will remain the position of Parks District as we come forward. If it does, and we cannot present the application or perfect the application and the conditions is, we are going to have to change that application. But as yet, we are still working through those with the departments.
So your representation would be that regardless of what happens with that access road, the fire hazard, which was identified long ago, will be mitigated at some point and in some way.
At some point, the fire department will be satisfied or not that our application protects public health, safety, and welfare by providing the correct fire ingress and egress. Yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right.
Okay.
Thank you. With that, I have no one else signed up. Oh, no. Can you come up so we can hear you? Thank you.
I'm just curious, what would be wrong with giving these people a hearing?
We'll talk about that.
Okay.
If you don't have testimony, then.
No, I just want the answer to
Thank
that
you.
question.
Thank you. All right. Any hands raised online? This is an appeal. We typically only allow the parties to the appeal to testify. Since it wasn't a public hearing, it's a little bit unclear, but it looks like we have no hands raised online.
No, Madam Mayor, no one of party of record is raising their hand.
And so we'll leave it at the parties that we currently have. Since this is an appeal, we could only have testimony if we follow that from Jane Suggs, Jamie Scott, or Joe Scott, none of whom are present. And so with that, we would go back to rebuttal, and that would start with the applicant, which would be Joanne, if you have anything further to say, and then finally, we'd end with rebuttal from Mr. Koppel. Go ahead.
Thanks. 6-foot separation takes us a long way
I know,
back.
it's-
Nothing else to add, but I'm here to answer any questions. And if any others arise, I'd appreciate it if the council called me back to the dais, to the microphone. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, with that, Mr. Koppel, you can rebut.
Madam Mayor, members of the Boise City Council, I really have nothing further to add. I think that the issues have been fairly aired in front of the council. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, with that, unless there are further questions for staff, I'll close the public hearing.
Madam Mayor, I do have a question for staff.
Okay.
And it's the same question that I've been asking everybody else. And I just want to try to make sure that the one area where I feel like there might be the slightest bit of gray area that I have understanding, and I guess it's how staff interprets a hazard. And in our memo, it really talks about how staff has not seen a new hazard that's been presented. And I'm wondering if you could help me, I guess, with the definition of a new hazard, or how the staff is defining a hazard.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, from the staff's perspective, a new hazard would be some type of some additional hazard that might have occurred onto the property that wasn't there during the original hearing. For instance, some type of like or if you're in a hillside and they had a landslide situation, the land started moving after the application, that's clearly a hazard. Or if there was or if the floodplain had been changed by FEMA and the new maps show that there's some additional floodway or some hazard such as that came in that wasn't there during the original hearing. It's those type of things that we're looking at. I would agree with kind of what's been stated, that the additional hazard of the parks reversing their decision on allowing the access doesn't really constitute the fire hazard was discussed. And fire access was discussed in length during the original hearing and was conditioned appropriately as per fire department requirements.
Thank you.
Any further questions of staff? Okay, with that, I'll close the public hearing. And what's the pleasure of council?
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
I move approval of PUD 19-11 and CFH 19-13, brought forward by Joe and Jamie Scott, 3600 West Americana Terrace. Appeal of the Planning and Zoning Commission's approval of a time extension associated with a conditional use, height exception, and river system permit for a residential plan development comprised of 5 structures with 304 dwelling units on 7.4 acres located in a C-3D service commercial with design review zone.
Can I clarify, you are moving to uphold the decision of the Planning and Zoning Commission?
There we go.
Thank you.
Second.
Discussion.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
After reviewing the record and reviewing the various memos several times, I think that what the Planning and Zoning Commission lacked in clearly spelling out their decision-making on the granting of this extension is clearly represented in the staff memos And I think that all of the necessary analysis is there as far as this goes. So I'm supporting the motion. And if the fire hazard is not mitigated by the developer, the project doesn't go forward. So I don't think that that changes the conditions that currently exist. And it certainly doesn't change the conditions by which a development would ultimately be built. So I'm comfortable with the extension.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor,
Councilmember Biggie.
I also will vote in favor of the motion, which I understand to be for denial of the appeal. And the reason first is that we have a standard of review here. So we're looking for errors or processes that didn't follow the law. But then, digging into it a little bit deeper, our code does not require a justification for a request to approve a time extension. Our code does require a public hearing on those requests in limited circumstances. And I think the appellant impliedly agreed with that by arguing the hazard issue. So one provision of our code, 1103.03.10b, says that a public hearing may be required if there are hazardous situations which have developed or have been discovered in the area. And the hazard that was pointed to here was the loss or potential loss of fire access due to a park's decision changing. That's a hazard to the application, but that's not a hazard in the area. The hazard in the area is the potential fire risk, which came up, was addressed, was discussed at great length in the original planning and zoning hearings. The decision to not hold a public hearing in this case was proper and is appropriate. We don't hold public hearings on everything. It's not a question of due process. It's a question of how much process is due. And in something like this, the amount of time that you have to prosecute or try to perfect your application, our code has decided is not the type of situation that requires the type of due process of public testimony, public hearings, except in the limited circumstances, like, for instance, a new hazard has developed. And I don't believe the applicant has shown that. And then finally, to the idea in the appeal argument that the appeal was not timely because 2 years had gone by, there is a provision of the code that says the effective date shall be stayed by the filing of an appeal. Here in particular, where the appellant filed the appeals in this case and obtained benefits from them by having the application changed materially from what the council had approved, all of that, both legally and procedurally under our code, says the deadline was stayed, but also just equitably. It's a matter of fairness. You can't delay an application through litigation and then play, aha, I got you, by then showing that by the time all the dust settles, the extension that the applicant needs comes after 2 years. So because of 1103.037E, which is that code provision that provides for the tolling, and for the reasons that I just said, I will vote in favor of the motion.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor.
Yes, Councilmember Thompson.
Briefly, I have nothing to add to that. I agree with everything that Councilmember Bajent and my fellow colleagues have stated on this matter. I do appreciate the dueling that occurred between the appellant and the applicant. You both came extremely well prepared with your legally stated arguments, and I commend you on that. But at the end of the day, I do agree with the points that were just summed up by Councilmember Bajent.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
I know for me, since I wasn't on council when this decision was originally made, I really wanted to make sure that I was looking at it carefully and understanding how to interpret this decision. Councilmember Bajent did a really good job at outlining what I feel like are pretty crystal clear aspects of city code in reasons that we cannot find error with what planning and zoning did. And as I've mentioned already in the questioning that I've already brought forward, in the one area where I felt like there could have been the slightest bit of gray area, I think Councilmember Woodings described really well, and that this project will not go forward if there is a fire hazard. And the fire hazard has already been discussed, and there's no way that it can move forward if that fire hazard continues to exist. And so based off of the discussions that we have, I cannot interpret that as a new hazard that has been already discussed or that won't be mitigated through the rest of the process. So I'll also be voting in favor of the motion.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate Councilmember Halliburton's consistent questioning about what is a new hazard. I think that helped clarify a lot for me in terms of how to view that. And I appreciate Ms. Butler saying they're not done figuring out a way to address that. And so I really appreciate everyone's questions and helping us to understand how to navigate this twisty-turny issue. So yes, obviously I will be voting in support of my own motion.
Thank you. I'm just going to say a couple of quick items. First of all, I think Councilmember Bajent did a great job of outlining the legal issues before us. Just to add slightly to that, section 11030310B has 3 tests for when there should be a public hearing on a time extension. None of those 3 tests are met. If you agree that the changing opportunity to mitigate the fire hazard is not a hazard in itself, and I would agree that it's not. The other thing I would note is that our consent agenda, which complies with state law, always says that items are considered to be routine and will be enacted in one motion, with the exception that there will be a separate discussion by the review body on these items if a citizen or a review body member so requests, in which the item will be removed from the general order of business and considered in its normal sequence. Normal sequence would be a discussion and a decision separately from the consent agenda without a public hearing, as this item doesn't meet the test for a public hearing. So I believe that that was done correctly, and that the review body, in this case, the Planning and Zoning Commission, correctly ruled that none of the tests requiring the public hearing had been met, and they didn't, it wasn't appropriate to have one. Having said that, I will say that if that fire hazard cannot be met in the way that is currently proposed, this will likely come back for a new hearing based on a new solution to providing that fire mitigation and or a new design based on the fact that they can't mitigate it in its current form. In either case, the 2-year extension is necessary to allow the applicant the opportunity to do one or the other and bring it back to us and bring it back to the public. So again, in all cases, I believe the extension is appropriate and that both our laws and the state laws have been followed in granting it. Any other discussion? Seeing none, would the clerk please call the roll?
Sanchez,
Yes.
Thompson,
Yes.
Woodings.
Yes.
Bajent,
Yes.
Clegg,
Yes.
Halliburton.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
Thank you. We're going to take about a 5-minute break here. We'll be back at 20 till. Item 4 on our public hearing schedule, and sorry, I've got to turn my paper back over now because I had it turned to the consent reading. We are at CZC 21-245, an appeal of the Planning and Zoning Commission's approval for co-location of wireless communication facility in R2D by Marcia Franklin at 2606 West Stewart Avenue. And Celine, you are up.
Yes, Madam Mayor, council members, the last item before you this evening is an appeal at 2606 West Stewart Avenue. The existing streetlight that the applicant wishes to replace, you can see on the left, is currently 25 feet tall. The proposed pole is 35 feet tall, which is still below or at the base height of the zone of the R2, which is a max height limit of 35 feet. So per code, this can be reviewed administratively since it's not deemed visually obtrusive, since it is a replacement of the existing pole and it's not a new pole drop in the area, and it does not increase the overall height of the zone. The administrative application was approved in July and then appealed and heard by the Planning and Zoning Commission in September. The commission held a public hearing and then denied the appeal and upheld the planning director's approval of the request. And now we're before you tonight on an appeal of the Planning and Zoning Commission's decision. As for the grounds of appeal, you've seen in the report, the first one is the appellant believes this should have been reviewed as a conditional use permit. Per code standards, this is an allowable use through the administrative review process. The second grounds was concerns with the obtaining of preliminary approval through the workflow prior to the application being filed. Like many projects, many applicants must go through a due diligence before proposing a project. And with the workflow for these small technology, especially for a city of Boise streetlight in question, the workflow is to check in with Public Works streetlights to make sure that that is an adequate asset that can be co-located on, and to then go get planning approval and then go back to Public Works for the engineering of said streetlight or replacement of the streetlight. So only after the entitlement is given can the applicant actually go through that detailed process with engineering documents, similar to a building permit if there was a planning entitlement for a multifamily project. The third was that the commission dismissed the appellant's testimony during the planning and zoning hearing. It is shown in the minutes that the commission reviewed the record, took public testimony by the applicant, the appellant, and neighbors, and then deliberated and followed a sound process for that public hearing. And lastly, that the commission didn't ask for more information from the applicant or staff for the need of the technology in the area. The commission did double check all of this at their hearing and was satisfied with the submittal. So in conclusion, the applicant and both the applicant and the appellant are here. Obviously, you'll be hearing from both of them this evening. But in the conclusion, planning team recommends that council deny the appeal and uphold the commission's decision to approve the wireless communication facility. Here for questions.
Questions for staff? It appears not.
Okay.
All right, thank you. So with that, we will go to the appellant, which is Marcia Franklin. And welcome.
A little short, so can you hear me all right? Great. Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the council. My name is Marcia Franklin, and I live at 2521 West Stewart Avenue. I first want to make it clear that I'm not part of any national or local anti-5G group, nor did I use, quote, boilerplate language from any such group as the basis for my appeal, as was stated by the Planning and Zoning Commissioner who made the motion to deny my appeal. My thoughts and words are my own, and they are those of a concerned citizen who strongly believes that there were substantive breaks with procedure in this matter, as well as errors in the staff report. It's actually not easy for me to be here before you, as it is not in my nature to do this. Also, I understand that the council gives deference to decisions of the Planning and Zoning Commission when considering an appeal from that body. The applicant contends that as such, any decision by that body is, quote, presumptively valid. However, if that decision was based on a faulty application, an improper permit approval, a deficient staff report, and a decision that did not fully consider the material before it, that presumption can be rebutted. So that is what I will discuss. I will need to set the stage a little bit. I'm not going to go back over the whole record. On April 23rd, 2021, I came home to find that significant boring and trenching of my yard was going on. The boring was happening in yards all the way down 26th Street. It was extensive. It lasted a month. And to this day, actually, my yard hasn't been fully repaired. When I inquired about it, I was told it was for 5G fiber for a Verizon tower. However, there was no tower there, nor had one been approved. There was simply a light pole. When I called the city light pole office, I was told that pre-approval had been given via telephone. And as was mentioned, the city's memo concedes that this occurs in order for the applicant to have confidence in the site location. I question, however, why this is done orally and is not in the public record. That is not proper procedure. It's my understanding that one reason is that when this is done in this manner, it also means that competitors won't know the location of prospective towers. For whatever the reason, pre-approval should be in the public record. With pre-approval, Verizon proceeded to lay all its fiber and dig a hole for utilities next to a light pole. Then a month and a half later, it finally filed its application for the tower. Now, as part of that process, Boise City Code requires that applicants for wireless communications facilities show, quote, a written analysis demonstrating why the proposed site is the most appropriate within the immediate area. That includes, quote, a detailed explanation as to why co-location is not possible on buildings or antennas in the proposed coverage area. However, the applicant gave only the barest of descriptions of other potential sites, just a few words. One location was described inaccurately. The other should never have been considered as it was on a high voltage power line. There actually are viable locations on the same street that the applicant mentioned, but none were set forth. Only 2 weeks after I filed my appeal did the applicant modify its application and say that it had looked at another location. However, there was only a vague description of where that was, 150 feet south. I could not find the location. There was no date as to when the applicant made this survey. And as mentioned, all the fiber had already been laid to the current location by then, and the application had been submitted. The applicant said there were no buildings onto which an antenna could be attached. That is also incorrect. There's a 3-story building at the end of my street and an office building 2 blocks away. The applicant's scant descriptions of locations that should never have been looked at in the first place show that no other locations than the current one were truly considered. It stands to reason that there was no incentive to look for alternative locations because the site already had been pre-approved and all the fiber in the neighborhood had already been laid. Most importantly, though, there was no analysis showing, quote, why the requested site is the most appropriate, which is required. Yet the staff report said without explanation that the requirement had been met. Hence, the report is deficient. The city's memo said the commission relied upon the staff report and the documents to make its decision. Therefore, I contend that that makes the commission's decision itself deficient. I note that there was no response from the city or the applicant regarding the potential locations that I submitted, nor did the commission ask any questions of the applicant as to why the current location was the most appropriate one. Boise City Code also requires, quote, a propagation study showing the location of existing facilities within the coverage area and radio frequency modeling, providing evidence as to why the WCF is needed at the chosen location. In its original filing, the applicant did not fulfill this requirement. Only on the day of my appeal hearing did it submit a propagation map. It was a very constrained view and did not show a facility that is just 4 blocks away. And it showed that only my house and 2 other houses would receive demonstrably better coverage as a result of the tower. That was it. There was simply no evidence provided to show per code that this facility was needed at the chosen location, and yet the application was approved. The report, therefore, is deficient, and the commission's decision, which relied on that report, is also deficient. On a related note, the applicant says I didn't call their propagation study into question, but I did, as evidenced in the transcript. Since that map had only been submitted into the record hours before the hearing, I had no time to respond to it in my written materials, which had been submitted on time the week before. Moreover, it is still my contention that the facility would be installed on a completely new pole and is not a co-location on an existing pole as stated by the application and the permit. The structure is made of very different material than the existing wooden light pole. It's much higher and wider than the current light pole. It will have a concrete pedestal, underground vaults, and noisy cooling fans. There are wooden light poles that have antennas co-located on them. Those fall under an administrative hearing process. This installation involves ground disturbance and a completely new and different pole. Therefore, it is subject to a conditional use permit and a public hearing process. In its memo for this hearing, the city maintains that the design standards in section 11-6 2A4 allow the administrative process to be used for, quote, replacement of existing utility poles with poles that are structurally capable of supporting WCF equipment. That is the language that will be up for consideration in a proposed update to this ordinance, one that will be before you at a later date. And indeed, as expressed in the background paper for that proposed ordinance, that language is designed to blunt appeals like this one. But that is not the current language in the code. I continue to maintain that per code, this new pole should have had a conditional use permit. By not granting it, the report and the commission's decision are deficient. Finally, the city's memo claims that all of the documents were duly reviewed by the Planning and Zoning Commission and that there was deliberation. But there was no evidence at the hearing that the commission did in fact review all the documents, and the minutes don't show any deliberation before the vote was taken. The maker of the motion merely stated his motion, after which he made several statements disparaging the appellant and other testifiers. The seconder of the motion said she was basing her decision on the staff report. However, there was no deliberation, and then the vote occurred. The commission never engaged with the real substance of my appeal. There's no evidence that it considered the full record prior to rendering its decision. For that and for the other reasons I have just enumerated, I believe that body's decision was not supported by substantial evidence, which is one of the grounds on which a denial of an appeal can be overturned. Therefore, I respectfully request that the council overturn the decision of the commission and grant my appeal. I want to take my remaining time to thank the staff of the Boise Planning and Development Department, especially planner Sabrina Mortensen, who was on this. I know how busy everyone is, and while I may disagree with the report, I really appreciate her service and her professionalism. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor,
Yes, Councilmember Bajan.
you know, our staff are so overworked and they have so many of these and others and others and others. And I just think it's wonderful that you recognize that. So thank you for your
She's been
kind words.
nothing but diplomatic and polite. It cannot be easy to have somebody write and say, you know, you didn't do it correctly or whatever. And she's been nothing but professional.
Thank you for acknowledging that.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I guess one quick question. Marcia, you mentioned that you didn't feel like there was adequate deliberation. And I think that maybe you're specifically talking about when the motion was made or immediately after the close. Did you feel like there was questioning that took place among the commissioners throughout the meeting? I guess, and the reason why I asked that question, to be transparent, is like looking at the minutes of the meeting. To me, I see a fair amount of deliberation that takes place in the questioning, like I'm doing right now, but potentially not as much at the end. Are you talking specifically about the close of the public hearing and that decision?
That council member and mayor, sorry, I'm usually on the other side. It's a fair question. Both. I think that certainly after the motion was made, in my view, there was not any deliberation. Prior to that, I was asked one question, which was, what is behind all of this? And I believe there might have been one question asked about noise. I had a video where I could play the noise, but I was not allowed to do that. So I feel it is both. I feel that there were no substantive questions asked of the applicant. You know, the core of my argument was that they hadn't proven that this is the highest, you know, the location that should be used. And I had submitted other locations, but there were no questions asked of the applicant. So I feel in both cases, both questioning and deliberation after motion was deficient.
Right. Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, hearing none. Next, we would hear from the applicant, Jason Stevens and Allison Burke. Are they online?
Yes, they are online. Jason Evans and Allison Burke.
Jason, Allison, go ahead.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Allison Burke, and I'm speaking here on behalf of Verizon. My address is 633 17th Street, Suite 3000, Denver, Colorado. I'm going to share a presentation. All right, we've already heard most of the substantive background from the planning department and then a little bit more from appellant, so I won't bore you with the factual details. But I just wanted to start with the legal standards for the City Council's review tonight. As Ms. Franklin stated, the Planning and Zoning Commission's decision is presumptively valid under the Boise City Code and state law.
I'd like to let you know that your presentation is not all showing. I don't know if you can change the presentation mode, but we're not being able to see all of the words on the screen.
Thank you for letting me know. Let me see if I can fix it quickly.
Thank you.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, great. So the Planning and Zoning Commission's decision is presumptively valid under the Boise City Code and Idaho law. And here, the legal standard for the City Council review, Ms. Franklin must satisfy her burden to show that there was a specific error under the code. The City Council must give significant deference to the Planning and Zoning Commission here because they are the ones with the expertise, and they themselves relied on the Planning Department's expertise in reaching their decision. The Boise City Council cannot grant Ms. Franklin's appeal unless the Planning and Zoning Committee committed a specific error. So Ms. Franklin identified 4 grounds for appeal in her written submission, and she touched on each of those briefly tonight. The first is regarding the administrative review process. And Ms. Franklin referenced that the Planning Department tonight referenced a new proposed language of the Boise City Code, but the old language of the Boise City Code allows administrative approval for structures that are not visually obtrusive. And that's the language that was originally used by the Planning Department and then used again in the Planning Department's memorandum tonight, that this new pole is not visually obtrusive. It's still under the 35-foot height limit in this zoning district, and so it is entitled to administrative review. At the bottom is a note from the Planning Department that states that the replacement is not considered to be a new pole. And that's the same conclusion that the Planning and Zoning Commission reached when they denied the appeal. I'm going to defer to my colleague, Mr. Evans, to talk about the alternate sites that were considered and the viability of those. But I will state that Verizon submitted with its memorandum a detailed analysis of potential alternative locations. It was not submitted with its initial application, but it was submitted in advance of the Planning and Zoning Commission hearing. And the Boise City Code allows the Planning and Zoning Committee to hear all evidence submitted up to the date of the hearing. So they were able to consider that secondary memorandum that explained the alternate sites that were considered. Ms. Franklin also talked about the propagation maps, and those were submitted to the Planning and Zoning. An initial propagation map was submitted with the application, and then a second propagation map that showed the changes from the original site without the new tower and the changes after the tower is installed And so the Planning and Zoning Commission was able to see the increase in service that was going to be provided because of the installation of the new site. Additionally, Verizon met all of the other requirements for submitting an application for a wireless communication facility. They provided an engineering report that had all the detailed plans and drawings. And let's see. Finally, one of the other grounds for appeal is that the Planning and Zoning Commission's decision was arbitrary and capricious and an abuse of their discretion. But the Boise City Code expressly states that a disagreement or more than one opinion about something does not make a decision arbitrary or capricious. It's just a disagreement. And I think that's a better explanation for Ms. Franklin's thoughts on the process, that it's more of a disagreement with the way the Planning and Zoning Commission came out in their decision than a truly arbitrary decision. And then Jason, do you want to hop in and discuss the alternate sites that were considered?
Thank you. So Jason, do you have something to add?
Madam Mayor, council members, I don't know, I've got my hand raised, so I don't know if I need to be accepted in or if am I allowed just to go ahead and speak. If you can hear me okay, I'd be happy to discuss the other site locations. So
yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Perfect. Perfect. So I wanted to discuss the other locations that were originally discussed and reviewed. Along the alleyway off 26 between West Stewart and West Regan, there is a power pole line that runs through that alleyway. Those lines were the one of the alternative locations that were reviewed due to the proximity to residential structures. We are required to meet ACHD standards. And part of those standards were not be able to be met just because of the proximity to the residences and the homes. So those were the options that were closest to the property itself. One of the other locations was another City of Boise structure that is at the intersection of Stewart, Davis, and North 25th. This was just over 380 feet away from the search ring center. So it became not viable just due to the location of the proximity of how far away it was from the center of the search ring and the coverage objective. And then the other option was to the west at Stewart and North 27th. And again, this was 400 feet away from the search ring's objective, so it would not meet the coverage objective. So there were alternatives that were chosen, but ultimately this location was at the center of the search ring and provided the best possible coverage for the need.
Thank you. Are there questions for either of the applicants? I have a question. I think I'll start this off. So I have to say, I've always been less than clear on the propagation map that is provided us, why that shows that that is the gapping coverage. So if what I'm referring to is the map that's on page 237 or 264 of our packet, I'm assuming that's the propagation study map. And what it shows is an area that you're trying to cover, but what I'm unclear on is what is the gray, the area that is not covered today, and the bright yellow, the area that will be covered if this is added.
Madam Mayor, council members, I'm happy to.
Before and after in our packet. That's interesting. All we have is the after, and I guess that makes it even less clear to me. So explain these two maps to me if you would.
Madam Mayor, council members, happy to discuss what you see on the before. The blank where you don't see any color whatsoever, that is current 5G coverage within the search area. What you see kind of on the upper right corner of the before map is
I'm having trouble hearing you. Can you speak up just a bit?
I'd be happy to. The coverage that you see on the upper right corner that is in yellow is coverage from another site, is from a previous site or an existing site that is further to the east or to the west, excuse me. It's a strong signal. Gray is a lighter signal. So these are areas of best coverage. Now, what you see on the right side is what the proposed coverage would look like with the new site that is proposed. So yellow being the strongest signal and gray being a lighter signal.
Thank you. So if I look at this map, I'm seeing a neighborhood that doesn't have very much coverage at all. And adding this one pole is going to provide coverage in one small little area of it. Does that mean that your plans are to add even more poles that will cover more of this area in the future? I guess that's what I feel like we're missing when we get this information with the one pole at a time. I'm not sure where the full gap is and what the plans are for covering that gap over time.
Madam Mayor, council members, I'm happy to, there is a project plan that comes out every year and they try to look at, as many years in advance as they can, but we look at sites on an individual basis and cover areas individually. This just happened to be the site location that covered this portion of this neighborhood. There are other sites, within a short distance. There's another one at 27th and State, for example. There's another one at 27th and Pleasanton, I believe. So they do cover this. They cover neighborhoods just one at a time. But this current project just covers this one single site.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
Can I just tack on to that line of thinking? So Jason, this is just for 5G specific coverage. This isn't LTE or any other type of cell coverage.
Madam Mayor, council members, this is specific to just the 5G coverage at this point. Now, this very well could turn into an LTE service in the future, but the overall goal is to continuously bring better coverage to our customers, and sometimes that means going into these more residential areas and these areas that are more dense, where you typically don't have a lot of commercial development.
Madam Mayor.
Yes, Councilmember Bajan.
Question, I think it's for Jason, maybe Allison, but I was unclear from the material I have here what the timeline was. Did you break ground to lay the cable for 5G based on the preliminary approval? Or did that happen after your administrative approval?
Madam Mayor, council members, I'll be happy to address unless Allison wants to, but we don't break construction whatsoever. There's no, Verizon does not start any construction whatsoever until all the approvals are in place. I believe that other fiber optic vendors are allowed to install within the right of way, but that is not Verizon starting any construction whatsoever.
Sorry, let me clarify. Using the passive voice, was the fiber optic cable for 5G here laid before the final approval and during the preliminary approval?
I believe that there may have been some work done, but it wasn't for this. But the fiber would have been done independent of this approval whatsoever. So it wasn't specifically Verizon doing this. The fiber optics company may have pulled the trigger to do that earlier, but Verizon did not do that whatsoever.
Okay, my question, where I'm kind of trying to figure out, is whether the fiber optic cable was laid such that your site location was determined before anything was approved. Because if that's the case, then it's not really credible to say that there were alternate locations. The cable was already in the ground and it was going to be where it was going to be. And I'm just trying to suss out whether that's the case or not.
Right. There is fiber optics laid throughout the right of way, whether a site is approved or not. So in this particular case, fiber was laid at this location.
Okay, thank you. I guess one more question. Based on where the fiber is laid, do you have alternate sites or not? In other words, because the fiber is where it is now, do you have alternate locations where this tower could go?
There are other locations that the fiber optics could be extended. Again, Verizon does not own the fiber. It's not fiber optics that is owned by Verizon. It's part of just the infrastructure and the service. They put their plans together just kind of like what we do. We work in a year in advance. It very well could have been that there was a quote or there was a contract or something that was approved for that fiber optics company, and it could have been done that they kind of got ahead of themselves. I'm not positive, but fiber is laid at risk all the time. And if the site would not have been approved or we didn't get through the proper steps in approval, Verizon would basically just be at risk on those service installations and it wouldn't move forward.
Got it. My last question. I understood from the appellant's presentation to us that apart from all of the procedural and legal arguments she made, there was a pretty emotional one, which is that she came home and her yard was ripped up. And then she went to look and there was no, at least from what she understood, there was no granted application. And then of course, then you come in, different company, to work on the installing the tower. And so I'm just trying to understand whether the tearing up of her yard predetermined the location of your tower before the location of your tower was finally approved.
So I'll defer. I know that when the fiber optics is laid, the companies secure approvals and ACHD permits for working within the right of way. And my understanding was that those permits were approved prior to our even knowledge that they had happened. So any permits or any work within the right of way would have been approved by ACHD prior to that work being done.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, that wasn't my last question. This is my last question, which was my first question. Was that approval the preliminary one that you received over the telephone, or was that final approval after going through ACHD's process? And I understand you're speaking in part on behalf of the fiber optics company, and that's different from you, but I'm just trying to understand when that cable went in.
Right, that's the question. I'm not positive. That we would have to find out a date of when that actually happened. And as far as the approval, which we're saying is over the phone, it's actually not an over the phone approval. It's a applicant or an email that's forwarded between Public Works that comes back that says, your preliminary location is approved. And basically, once Public Works says your preliminary location is approved, then we'll start our engineering services, we'll start surveys, we'll start that process before we even submit to planning and zoning. So at what point in time that any fiber optics work would have happened between that, I'm not positive, but because again, I can't speak at the fiber company and their schedule and what they did. All I can speak to is the process that Verizon went through with the city, with Public Works. And we would not have done any of that work from a construction or real estate standpoint without all the proper approvals in place.
Thank you very much. And thank you for clarifying. It is an email. I probably misspoke there. So thank you for clarifying. It's not
No
just
worries. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you. It appears that we don't have any other questions, so we'll move on to the public testimony. This is a public hearing. We had 3 parties of record. Are any of them online and ready to testify?
No, Madam Mayor, we have an Annie Black, but she is not a party of record.
Okay, so we have no one who is a party of record who has raised their hand to testify or signed up tonight. Since it is an appeal, we can't take anyone else. With that, we would go back to rebuttal, which would start with Verizon. And Jason and Allison, if you have anything more to say.
I'm not sure we have anything extensively to say. I just want to reiterate that the fiber laying process is separate and independent from the administrative approval zoning certificate that Verizon applies for this specific site. So a third-party company lays that fiber, probably dictates where Verizon chooses to try and get permits to put its sites, but that's a separate process that somebody undertakes at their own risk that that Verizon's application won't be granted. So it's two separate processes, and essentially Verizon relies on the fact that there is fiber there when they go to do it, but the fiber laying company does it independently, and more than just Verizon, other cell companies can use that fiber for their own cell towers as well.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. One question for Allison.
Sure.
Thank you, Allison. That's what I was getting to. My concern and my question is really, to put it really bluntly, whether you credibly presented alternate sites given that the fiber was already there. I understand that you're not the company that lays it. I understand that other companies use it. I understand that that's all very much beyond your control, but I'm trying to suss out whether your alternate sites were credible or whether they were cobbled together after the fact, because given where the fiber was, you had to put it where you had to put it. That was my question.
Yeah, thanks. So Jason knows more about choosing the alternate sites and the timing of doing that in tandem with the laying of the fiber. So I'll let him answer when those alternate sites were identified and then when they were kind of deemed not to be sufficient for this particular site.
Madam Mayor, council members, happy to. So the other locations were along Stewart Avenue. So if one of the other locations were to be chosen, the fiber optics that was laid could have potentially been used for those other locations.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, with that, Marcia, you get last shot.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the council. I want to say unequivocally, and I am sorry I don't have it right in front of me, but it is in your packet, that through a Freedom of Information Act request to ACHD, there is correspondence between Mr. Evans and the ACHD for right-of-way in which he clearly says the number of the pole to which this fiber will be going, and says that it is likely that it'll be a replacement pole. I have included that in my packet. I did a screenshot of that FOIA request. The company that was hired to do the laying of the fiber has a direct relationship to Mr. Evans' company, which is acting as an agent for Verizon. When I talked to anyone laying the fiber, they said they were doing it for Zayo. Zayo is the name of the company, subcontracted to 3C, subcontracted to Gem State. It was a whole shell of companies involved, but the ultimate determinant was that Mr. Evans had secured from ACHD right-of-way and preliminary approval from the city for the pole itself. He states very clearly to ACHD the actual number and the GPS coordinates of the pole. So there is a nexus there. I also want to say that the first map that was submitted was completely blank. So that's why on the day of the second hearing or of the appeal hearing, they submitted that second map. To your question, which is a great one, the yellow shows my house on the right, my neighbor's house, and basically a swimming pool across the street that will have enhanced coverage. What it does not show is that there are already facilities at 23rd and State, 24th and Madison, 21st and Madison, Fairview and 27th, and another one that has been approved at 27th and Pleasanton, and then a facility on Davis. And I'm always confused by these propagation studies as well, because they only give you this really micro view. They don't show what else is there. And as he said, this is going to be not just 5G, but LTE. So I think that's really what I wanted to address, is I don't feel that due diligence was given by the applicant to explain why this was the best location. As far as one thing I did want to say is that he mentioned that this is the first time in all my months of doing this that he mentioned something on 25th Street that he had looked at. I've never heard that before. And then his thing that he submitted the day of the actual appeal hearing, where he just said it was 150 feet south, I pasted off and I assumed it was the alleyway. And I hear today that it was an alleyway. I don't know why he was looking anyway at an alleyway that has a high power, that has a power line on it to do for this. For me, from my perspective, Councilmember Bajan, it seemed as if these were tack on or add on locations that were discovered only after the one that they really want, they got. And I'm just curious, I really would like them to do the due diligence to explain why this is it. I do believe that on 27th and Stewart, which is a major thoroughfare, and where they've put some of their other facilities, the fiber can be easily extended half a block to there. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
And there's a 3-story building there now too. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you. Any questions for staff?
Madam Mayor, I do have a question for staff. So we've seen a number of these similar appeals. That's actually a direct quote from the Planning and Zoning Commission. What I'm wondering is that this one does feel different, and I'm trying to figure out why that does feel different. And I'm trying to figure out if this has followed the exact same timeline and the approved timeline and the approved methods that we have in place and that we have used for our other approvals as well. Is there anything that deviates from our approved timeline or our approved sequence that we usually follow for these types of projects?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Halliburton, no. I think the only thing different about this is that it's our own city streetlight, where other appeals you've seen have been ACHD traffic lights or pedestrian crossing poles.
All right, thank you. That's helpful.
Celine, so I do have a question, and whether it's germane to this particular decision, I haven't concluded, but the question is this: do we as a city have a good understanding of what this full network is going to be like, or are we being asked to respond one by one to micro locations of specific antennae?
Madam Mayor, we have been in meetings with the different providers and have seen the map, but we have not been given the map because it is proprietary information, and they certainly don't want to have that be public records requestable. We certainly know that there is a lot coming. We've seen a lot over the last few years, but we do receive them one by one. Sometimes we've been asking to see them in clusters, so we see 5 or 10 at a time, just to be able to have conversations about multiple items at once rather than just one-on-one. But past that, it is just one location at a time for the most part.
And do we have any levers in our code that would allow us to have a more comprehensive look?
Madam Mayor, not at this time. There's, obviously a wireless ordinance amendment coming before you, which is a good start to help with the bandwidth and just the number of applications we've seen. So I mean, we can talk more about that during the ordinance hearing, of course. There is, especially with city assets for city streetlights, we'd love to see Public Works have a master streetlight plan and to say, these are all the places you can do that, but that's a bigger conversation and we can't just have it with one provider. It does need to be with multiple providers, just to keep it fair and honest.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? All right, with that, I'll close the public hearing.
Madam Mayor,
Councilmember Bajan.
I move that we deny the appeal in CZC 21-245.
Second.
Discussion.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
this one does feel different in some ways, but under the standard of review that we have, I don't see any reason to overturn or disturb the Planning and Zoning Commission. The procedure there was lawful. There is something uncomfortable about the preliminary approvals. They are preliminary, and when a company undergoes to take risk based upon them, the company bears that risk. I didn't feel like I got a clear answer as to whether the ground was broken here based on a preliminary approval, but at any rate, the company bears that risk, and if the result of the hearing is different, they're the ones who are out. As to alternate sites, I agree with the Planning and Zoning Commission to the extent that it said alternate sites were presented. I think it's fair to ask a company to pick its site in advance and try to target that and try to put infrastructure in to put its utility services on a particular pole. It needs to consider alternate sites, but I'm sure there are many places in the city where there's only one viable site. And so looking at alternate sites, even though they're not viable based on where the fiber is or other factors, shouldn't preclude the application. I don't think that the Planning and Zoning Commission was arbitrary or capricious. I think there were elements of the discussion there that could have been conducted differently, but I did see them deliberate throughout the hearing, ask questions, chew on it, get the information they needed, and there was a record to support their decision. And for the same reason, I think the decision was supported by substantial evidence. The applicant did provide all of the documentation that it was required to. So for those reasons, I would deny the appeal.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
There's a couple of things that feel different. A couple of things I guess I understand with this particular one. One is that we do see quite a few of these similar appeals coming to us, and Planning and Zoning, of course, does as well, which is recognized in the minutes. And there were ways where it was treated similar. And if this was your own appeal, if you're presenting your own information, if you haven't been involved in these discussions before, if you have some unique concerns, I can certainly understand why it would seem like a decision was rushed or not deliberated enough. And I can understand why the Planning and Zoning Commission feels like they've had these discussions enough time that it probably requires less of a deliberation than a typical decision would. I can also understand why it would be very frustrating to come home and to see your yard chewed up and to understand how that can happen and not necessarily know why. So I do understand that this is frustrating. I do see some issues. I do see some needs for clarity and better long-term planning. But I also don't see any error in the Planning and Zoning Commission, or that the way that this process moved forward, or that it was done in any sort of way that wasn't by code or wasn't legal. And so for those reasons, I'm supporting the motion.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
I just want to thank Ms. Franklin for, I think, a very well thought out appeal. She brought up some things that I hadn't thought about in this discussion, and really brought some things to light. And while I agree that Planning and Zoning didn't err in their decision, I disagree with the commissioner who said that these are boilerplate arguments. I actually feel exactly the opposite. I think that this was a really well thought out appeal. It was thoughtful. It presented new information that maybe we haven't thought about before. But I don't think that Planning and Zoning made any error at the same time. So I want to thank you for that. And thank you for all of the time that you put into it. And hopefully we can, in our new ordinance, prevent some of these same heartburn issues in the future.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
Just note that I would agree with what Councilmember Wooding said, and I was going to say something somewhat similar in that I appreciate the points you brought up. They were unique and extremely different than any of the points that I've heard on any of these poles or these antennas that have come before us in the past, which is much more oriented around a certain group that's opposed to 5G, as opposed to the reasoning behind the selection process and how that process is handled. I would, at the end of the day, agree with the points that my colleague, council member Bajent made, but I think that we have some fodder here for a future ordinance and future improvements within our own city. Whether that's grouping together some of these in the future when we see them, I'm not sure if that's the answer. I think there probably is some proprietary aspects to these polls, and that's probably the reason they shoot them to us 1-1, which is big pain in the tooth, but I certainly understand the reasoning. But yeah, I would agree with the motion, and I'll be supporting it. Thank you.
Madam Mayor.
Councilmember Sanchez.
Thank you. Ms. Franklin, I just want to thank you for bringing this forward. Something that I've observed over the past 4 years is sometimes when we have folks bring an issue forward, the vote may not go their way, but when they do work like you do, which is very thorough, it ends up benefiting the entire community as we move forward. It highlights some issues that we can address, perhaps not in this moment, but moving forward. And so I just want to thank you so much for bringing this issue forward the way that you did.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
One other comment, Councilmember Thompson reminded me of it. There was some discussion with the staff about obtaining more clarity on long-term plannings. And I expect that discussion caused at least one telephone to ring, an alarm that the city of Boise may be demanding your proprietary maps or proprietary plans for how you're going to implement the next level of 5G or whatever in the city. And I think we're all sensitive to that. I don't think anybody in Boise wants to demand that anybody turn over their most sensitive business information in a way that their competitors would get a hold of. It's an issue we would like to be able to plan and we would like to be able to understand, but that's the kind of issue that we will take seriously. And to the extent we talk about it further, we'll be very careful with that, I think.
Thank you. I will just say this briefly. Also, thank you, Marcia, for bringing this forward in the way that you did. To me, this points out the issue that we hear most often at City Council, that when things happen in a neighborhood that are unpredictable and uncertain and happen in ways that are unexpected and without prior knowledge, they do create problems in the neighborhood. And so our processes should address that. I think you brought forward some issues that will allow us to do that. And I appreciate you doing that. Like my fellow council members, I can't in this particular decision find error in the decision of the Planning and Zoning Commission, but do believe that the city, despite the proprietary information that may be involved, does deserve, as do the citizens, some certainty about what the deployment of this 5G will mean. It is a public infrastructure. It does serve the public, and we've got to, I hope, come to some understanding that will help everyone not feel like every single one of these is a one-off, but that there is some reasonable plan behind it. So with that, would the clerk please call the roll?
Sanchez.
Yes.
Thompson.
Yes.
Woodings.
Yes.
Bajent.
Yes.
Clegg.
Yes.
Halliburton.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
Is there anything else to come before the council?
Madam Mayor, I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Hey.
We are adjourned. Thank you.